This is space. You might have seen it by now, and we've been trying to explore it for a long time and for all it's worth. With all attempts of space explorations as yet, we've got far enough to make an iceberg meme about it. Of course, not all of the space endeavors in human history can be expected to be mentioned in this, but we'll go through all we got here in manner of a SrUB iceberg explanation video. Oh, you're not sure what that is? Well, here you go. And if you know, let's go right to tale one. Kubrick faked moon landing. This refers to the theory that moon landing actually never happened. NASA reached out to Hollywood, where Stanley Kubrick helped them fabricate the whole thing up. And to support this, some of the main points of argument that show up are there being no stars in these moon landing footages, and how the flag seems to be waving when it could not be. Also some links from the filmmakers' movies as well. So amazing that it all would have blown even Stanley's mind. The unsure ones love spreading this story, and space enthusiasts love disproving it. So much fun. $1 million space pen. This is supposedly a pen that NASA spent millions of dollars to make so that it can write in space by somehow having its ink be put onto the paper independent of gravity. This discussion is mostly extended by adding that the Soviet cosmonauts came up with a much cheaper alternative to it, which was using pencils rather. This inspiring little tale actually isn't true and has gained popularity due to this scene from West Wing.
We spent millions of dollars developing a pen for the astronauts that would work in zero gravity. You know what the Russians did?
Used a pencil?
They used a pencil.
In reality, the answer is that even NASA used wooden pencils to do the job. But now the question is, where did West Wing get the story from? You can't see the Great Wall of China from space. There has been a belief that the Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure that's actually visible from space. Where does this come from? Maybe from the fact that it is the longest creation of mankind on land, so maybe perhaps somehow it's visible. Mostly coming from people who are probably not from the few individuals who went to space to confirm that. Since I can see this T added to the entry by the author of the iceberg, I'll just add that this is actually not true and that somebody probably started that rumor, largely underestimating the size of the blue marble. The face on Mars. This refers to this apparent face-like shape that is visible on the Mars, which was founded by NASA's Viking 1 spacecraft when it was circling the planet. And as it monitored the region on the red planet, which is referred to as Cydonia, around the possible landing sites of its sister ship Viking 2, it captured images of this massive face staring back at it. A face that is actually a mesa that's somehow shaped in a way as to make it convenient for pareidolia that human perception seems to love. Guns in space. If you have a gun and you're out in the space and you shoot a bullet out of it, the bullet will keep traveling in space all alone forever. Because although a bullet is pretty fast in the speed standards here on Earth, in the expanding universe that still isn't fast enough. The galactic clusters would be moving away from the shot bullet every second at a pace way faster than the fastest known bullet you can shoot in the abyss at the moment. So guns in space would only lead to lonesome bullets traveling through the fabric of the universe for the rest of the eternity. Laika was a stray dog from Moscow who in 1957 was chosen by the Soviet scientists to be the first animal to make an orbital space flight around the Earth in order to test the effects of zero gravity on living organisms and to aid their pace in the space race. And so an almost 3-year-old mongrel dog was strapped into Sputnik 2 with a harness and implanted sensors to detect and measure the changes in stats like pulse, breathing, heart rate, etc. The sad part is that soon after the launch, those sensors captured Laika's heart rate increase as the temperature in the rocket rose up to 40 degrees Celsius. And within about 6 hours, Laika's heart stopped. The frustrating part, however, is that it was well known that it would turn out bad for Laika. There were no plans to have her return. Even scientists' best guess was that she would survive for about 7 days before dying of oxygen deprivation. For given the technology known at the time, the tragic end was inevitable. Yet, driven by the pressure of being the first one to explore the universe, they decided to push the button, knowing that the capsule that the dog was in was pretty much her grave. Rest in peace, love. Space law. Much like legislation and constitutions in the world to regulate human lifestyle on Earth, space law is a body of instructions to ensure peaceful use of outer space, and with a defined framework of agreements and principles, best manage the projects, punish the crimes, and approve the pursuits taking place out there. Space law is of great importance in governing space exploration, satellite operations, international space activities, etc. Mars Climate Orbiter Metric Fail. Mars Climate Orbiter was a robotic space probe that was launched on December 11, 1998. Other than the tasks NASA launched it for, like studying the Martian climate, atmosphere and surface changes, it was also supposed to act as a communications relay in the Mars Surveyor 98 program for Mars Polar Lander and deep space probes. The mission, however, was unsuccessful due to certain navigation error caused by a failure to translate the English units to metric, leading to loss of the said spacecraft on September 23, 1999. And it was then concluded by the engineers that the orbiter probably burned up due to entering too low into the Mars's atmosphere, therefore failed, merely because of someone not using the right units. Boran Shuttle. Boran Shuttle was the first space plane produced as part of the Soviet Boran program, which had successfully completed an automated uncrewed mission in 1988. It was pretty much a Russian response to NASA's space shuttle. A part of this most expensive project in the history of Soviet space exploration has now been sitting in a building at Baikonur Cosmodrome Spaceport, since the said program was cancelled due to lack of funding around the collapse of the Soviet Union. NERVA. NERVA, or Nuclear Engine for Rocket Vehicle Application, was a joint effort of NASA and Atomic Energy Commission, with the principal objective of using nuclear rocket engine systems as propulsions for the space mission application. The Nuclear Thermal Rocket Engine Development Program ran for about 2 decades, until the funding was cut in 1973. And although time and again scientists proposed the return of the nuclear-powered propulsion to explore the universe, so far the utility of nuclear fission for the required oomph remains to only exist in the curious wonderment of space devotees. Mercury 13. Mercury 13 was a group of 13 American women who were part of a privately funded program that's aim was to test and screen the participants for spaceflight. The name might remind you of Mercury 7, group of 7 astronauts finalized to fly in space for Project Mercury. And as a matter of fact, it was the person who governed the results of that Mercury 7, William Lovelace, who noticed how women just might have more of the kind of qualities that are required to be in a spacecraft in space.
Well, of course, the obvious ones are that women weigh less and require less weight, food, and oxygen, so there's a considerable weight saving. Or, taken another way, you could go up in the same booster, go up higher, or stay up a lot longer than a man could. Of course, every hour you stay in space, you learn a lot more. The other advantages the doctors and scientists tell us is women, well, from a psychological standpoint, which will become increasingly important on longer space voyages, where women can sit in confined quarters and do tedious work over a longer period of time. They require less stimulation. Men want to be up and around and doing things. And on flights, where it might be months, perhaps even 6-8 months, going out to Mars or Venus and back, if you've got a small spaceship and limited facilities, well, psychologists say women would definitely be much more able to withstand the isolation and the boredom of a flight like this than men can. Of course, men, I still say one is not better than the other. Men are physically stronger than women, and this is a very definite advantage in their favor, but I think it ought to complement each other, men and women, on certain space voyages, and there's certainly no competition between the two.
Regardless, and despite many attempts of the members and Dr. Lovelace himself, these immensely deserving ladies could not fly in space, as the documented standards already set by NASA to be qualified to become an astronaut were not quite met.
Each must be a graduate of a Navy or Air Force test pilot school, 1,500 hours of flight time, qualified in jet aircraft, an engineering background, and 5 feet 11 or less.
So here's my letter to Dr. Lovelace saying, I'm physically fit and I'm a pilot and I'd like to participate in your tests. And here's his letter back. And he encloses a card which outlines the qualifications of the women astronauts. First thing they ask you is, what are your total flying hours? I can tell them that. Then they want to know your total jet hours, your aircraft flown hours in each, balloon flights, parachute jumps, hours flown over 20,000 feet, hours flown over 30,000 feet, hours flown over 40,000 feet, low pressure chamber indoctrination, explosive decompression experience, partial pressure suit experience. I could answer number one. Yeah, none of us had any qualifications.
We were
She was an
subjects.
engineer.
We were subjects to be tested.
They've made some statements like, well, we don't have any women in this country that are jet test pilots, and this is one of the requirements to enter our testing program. Well, this was disproved when I went through the test and passed them. I didn't have jet test pilot experience, but I still passed the same test that the male military jet test pilots had, and of course it's been totally disproved now when Russia sends Valentina up, who was a parachute jumper and a textile factory worker. That was her only background before she entered training. So like I say, there's no legitimate reasons on why the United States has not included women in their space program.
Nixon's speech.
20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour.
About 30 years after 16th July 1969, the day of the launch of Apollo 11 for NASA moon landing, we learned how NASA and US government were not absolutely certain if the first men stepping on the moon would also be able to step off it to return back home or not. And so, only 2 days before the historic event, the American author William Safire was asked to prepare a speech which is now known as Nixon's speech, because the speech was written for then US President Richard Nixon to read to the world on live television in case of a moon disaster, like Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong not being able to reunite at the command module, because then they would have to be left abandoned. Mission control would then have to close down the communication, leading to these two moon men to either starve to death or commit suicide.
At that time, the most important, the most dangerous part of the moon mission was to get that lunar module back up into orbit around the moon and to join the command ship. But if they couldn't, and it was a good risk that they couldn't, then they would have to be abandoned on the moon, left to die there. And mission control would then have to use their euphemism, close down communication. And the men would have to either starve to death or commit suicide. And so we prepared for that with a speech that I wrote. And the president was ready to give that. And of course, the module made it.
These literally are Mr. Safire's own words from an interview of his. And this is that Nixon's speech.
In the event of moon disaster, fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery. but they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice. These two men are laying down their lives in mankind's most noble goal, the search for truth and understanding. They will be mourned by their families and friends. They will be mourned by the nation. They will be mourned by the people of the world. They will be mourned by a Mother Earth that dared send two of her sons into the unknown. In their exploration, they stirred the people of the world to feel as one. In their sacrifice, they bind more tightly the brotherhood of man. In ancient days, men looked at the stars and saw their heroes in the constellations. In modern times, we do much the same. But our heroes are epic men of flesh and blood. Others will follow and surely find their way home. Man's search will not be denied, but these men were the first, and they will remain the foremost in our hearts. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come will know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind.
We realized what enormous risks that were being run by these astronauts. They laid their lives on the line every time. And as we look back to 30 years ago, some will remember Chappaquiddick that weekend. But the headline of Men Walk on Moon, that will be looked at 100 or 1,000 years from now.
Sea Dragon. Sea Dragon was a conceptualized design for a two-stage sea-launched orbital super heavy lift launch vehicle back in 1962. This was cancelled by Space Technology Laboratories due to the expected costs mainly. Pity as always it is that something meant to reach further than the present human knowledge of space and serve humankind by exploring beyond our world and possibly the known universe is still somehow very much limited by the myths created on the earth by humans themselves. Call it obvious, call it tragic, call it funny. The all-white space shuttle, STS-1 and 2. This refers to basically the first two space flights by NASA, STS-1 and STS-2. The shuttles used in these initial two NASA space missions are known as all-white since that's how they were made to look, because the external tanks are ET attached to the space shuttles carrying liquid hydrogen fuel and liquid oxygen oxidizer were painted white to protect the tanks from the ultraviolet light. Post said missions though, the tanks were left unpainted as it didn't really seem necessary to paint them. In fact, rather added considerable weight to the launches. DART and planetary defense. DART, or Double Asteroid Redirection Test, was a NASA space mission to test a method of mitigation against near-Earth objects by assessing the impact of a spacecraft on an asteroid of its transfer of momentum, and to prove the concept of kinetic impactor, which was to demonstrate that a high-speed asteroid could be targeted by a spacecraft in order to modify the trajectory of the potentially destructive object and change its target orbit.
Oh my goodness, look at that. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Looks to me like we're headed straight in. Oh my gosh. Oh wow.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
8, 7,
Oh,
6,
wow.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh my gosh. Oh wow.
Awaiting visual confirmation.
All right.
The We got it? Waiting.
And we have an impact. We guarantee for humanity in the name of planetary defense.
Fantastic.
This was very much successful. Planetary defense like this is where NASA and other space-related corporations work to figure out ways to protect humanity against spatial and natural dangers with such man-made methods. And oh, by the way, this is where I found that searching dot in Google does this. Remember that shot? Okay, never mind. Juice, Europa Clipper, and life in the outer solar system. Okay, we can do it. All three of them being jammed in one entry makes sense, because JUICE here refers to Jupiter Icy Moon Explorer, which is an interplanetary spacecraft by ESA that was launched on 14th of April 2023. As the name suggests, it's been launched to explore the 3 icy moons of Jupiter. Of these icy moons, one is Europa, and Europa Clipper is going to be the first ever interplanetary space mission by NASA to conduct a detailed reconnaissance of this Jupiter's moon. With the departure date targeted in the October of 2024, it's planned to arrive there sometime in the year 2030 after traveling over 1.8 billion miles along with a poem and signatories around the world, connecting these two water worlds.
In Praise of Mystery, a poem for Europa. Arching under the night sky, inky with black expansiveness, we point to the planets we know. We pin quick wishes on stars. From Earth, we read the sky as if it is an unerring book of the universe, expert and evident. Still, there are mysteries below our sky. The whale song, the songbird singing its call in the bough of a wind-shaken tree. We are creatures of constant awe, curious at beauty, at leaf and blossom, at grief and pleasure, sun and shadow. And it is not darkness that unites us, not the cold distance of space, but the offering of water. Each drop of rain, each rivulet, each pulse, each vein. O second moon, we too are made of water, of vast and beckoning seas. We too are made of wonders, of great and ordinary loves, of small, invisible worlds, of a need to call out through the dark.
Canals on Mars. Guns in space, canals on Mars. Well, what do I say? You see, for the longest time, talks of canal-building civilizations of Mars were all over the Earth, in stories and writings and gossip. It wasn't really until NASA's Mariner missions when spacecrafts finally monitored the surface of Mars and debunked this erroneous belief of Martian canals that we understood how this misinterpretation in observation of the sky was because of the illusions being formed due to images being smeared out of atmospheric layers of Earth, as then telescopes and methods were not ideal for obtaining the best observation of the space and celestial bodies. Martian Piloted Complex. Martian Piloted Complex, or MPK, was a space mission study by the Soviet Union and the first ever serious plan to Mars by the Soviets. The voyage was proposed in 1956 by Mikhail Tikhonov, which would have carried a crew of 6 cosmonauts on a 900-day expedition on Mars. Assembled in low Earth orbit, the craft would have used conventional liquid propellants, and after about a year of exploration, the crew then would return to Earth with the re-entry vehicle being about 15 tons, which 30 months prior to that would have been something about 1,630 tons. Humble beginnings. SrUB. Zvezda, apparently meaning Zvezda, was a Soviet Union ISS module, which was a moon-based plan for lunar colonization as part of their N1L3 program, where N1 and L3 had their own roles in the whole mission. However, all of the 4 test flights of the N1 rockets turned out to be disasters in their own ways. And this 1962 top-secret program that had come into picture post-Sputnik's success had to be discontinued and officially cancelled in 1976, as it could never be used to carry, let alone ferry, any cosmonauts over the Zvezda moon base. The luck of Barbara Morgan. Barbara Morgan is an American teacher who also ended up being the first teacher in space when she was an astronaut. But this tale wasn't always too straightforward for her, which is where the luck part comes into picture. As initially she was selected to be the first backup teacher as part of NASA's Teacher in Space project.
Backup teacher who will make the flight if the winner can't, Barbara Morgan of the McCall-Donnelly Elementary School in McCall, Idaho. Congratulations. And we have a little thing.
However, the Challenger spacecraft that carried Krista McAuliffe, the primary teacher in space, and 6 others, met an undesirable fate as the vehicle exploded on live television seconds within the launch.
We'll throttle down to 65% shortly.
Don't know what the effect might be just yet. The astronauts will take a look later on during the mission.
Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs.
APUs, the auxiliary power units.
2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles.
It's always amazing to hear how quickly the shuttle moves. It's already more than 4 miles downwind, as we just heard.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go and throttle up.
Roger, go and throttle up.
This shuttle mission will launch, my God.
1 minute 15
There's been an explosion.
Velocity 2,900 feet per second, altitude 9 nautical miles, downrange distance 7 nautical.
Barbara Morgan, being the backup teacher, wasn't on board that day and so was still alive. And despite watching her friend die, now was only more determined to carry the legacy on.
I think we all have an obligation, and I mean there are always tragedies in life, and we have an obligation to carry on.
As and when the moment comes into her life of finally becoming the first teacher to give science lessons in space, which took many more than what she guessed.
Barbara, what is the soonest your mission might be?
I really can't answer that. I assume it's going to be at least 2 years.
Maybe a lot more?
Maybe a lot more.
Making it all into a heroic story and finally giving a much-deserved happy ending to this long, emotional, and tragic story.
1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Endeavour, expanding the International Space Station while creating a classroom in space.
The throttle-up call acknowledged by Commander Scott Kelly, joined on the flight deck by pilot Charlie Hobaugh, flight engineer Rick Mastracchio and Tracy Caldwell, Dave Williams, Al Drew, and Barbara Morgan seated down on the middeck, Morgan racing towards space on the wings of a legacy.
After more than 21 years in 2007.
Good morning, Discovery Center. Good afternoon. We're happy to be here with you. This is Al Drew, Clay Anderson, Dave Williams, and I'm Barb Morgan, and we are ready for your first question. Welcome aboard the International Space Station.
We have a quick message from Idaho.
Hi, I'm Sarah Avery. If you threw a baseball in space, how fast did it go?
Mars Monolith. Mars Monolith is the name given to this object found on the surface of Mars, which resembles a monolith. These pictures of it were captured by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter from about 180 miles away. It's probably a large rock turned into a boulder due to being worn smooth by erosion. But understandably, there are theories that it's an object intentionally placed by extraterrestrial beings for intelligent life, like ours maybe, to notice and decode messages of. 1980 Plesetsk disaster. This was a Soviet rocket explosion at the launch pad that killed 48 on March 18, 1980. The rocket Vostok 2M was being fueled by the military technicians so it could launch a new spy satellite, Selena D, a few hundred miles north from Moscow at the launch complex Site 43 in the top-secret Russian spaceport Plesetsk Cosmodrome when the unfortunate event occurred. The Soviet kept the secret spaceport a secret for 3 more years, but the deadly explosion remained unknown to the public until 1989. Initially, human error was said to be the reason for the set failure, but later investigation determined that it was caused due to a design flaw. Project Orion. Project Orion was a NASA spacecraft design concept from early 1950s and 60s that would have made use of nuclear pulse propulsion for space travels, which is a hypothetical method of using successive nuclear explosions of hydrogen atomic bombs for the required thrust. To keep the crew and contents safe, the compartment was to be kept well shielded, and water-cooled springs behind the pusher plate was to ensure the suppression of shocks. Although Defense Advanced Research Project Agency granted the study of General Dynamics Corporation in 1958, in 1964 the project had to be cancelled when the atmospheric nuclear testing was outlawed by the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963. Navy pilot UFO videos. Also known as Pentagon UFO videos, these are the visuals that were recorded from the US Navy fighter jets by their forward-looking infrared cameras, displaying certain unidentified flying objects flying at high speeds in Earth's atmosphere. It wasn't until 2020 when Pentagon officially released first 3 of the 4 videos that the unidentified aerial phenomena was addressed by them.
Wrong, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. The whole thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. It is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's another thing, it's rotating.
The reason to which could have been to clear possible misconception and speculation amongst the public with regards to the unknown objects captured, or the declassification of these clippings by the US Government of Defense could also be to signify the declaration towards the sightings of unidentified flying objects, and moreover the existence of extraterrestrial beings.
Nickel 610 Roger. Roger. There's troubleshooting Did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow.
Well, that there is the scarier possibility. Yuri and Vladimir, Soyuz 1. Yuri Gagarin was the first man in space. Vladimir Komarov was the first man to die in space, as far as we know. And Soyuz 1 was the first space flight of Soviet space program Soyuz that carried Vladimir Komarov. It was supposed to be followed up by Soyuz 2A, carrying Yuri Gagarin. Much unfortunately though, due to issues in Soyuz 1, Vladimir was ordered to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, during which a parachute failure caused Komarov to crash his way down to the ground in the craft, entering the Earth literally, while figuratively leaving it, sadly.
The people paid homage to cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov, relatives, friends, brother spacemen, government and party heads, honoring the hero of the Soviet Union, whose tragic death marks another chapter in man's conquest of space.
Soyuz 2A then obviously had to be cancelled. And that's how Komarov's sacrifice in a way saved Yuri Gagarin, to whom Vladimir Komarov was a father figure. Because it's known that the faults in Soyuz 1 that caused all this were very much apparent. But the pressure of 50th anniversary of the Russian Revolution to get this spacecraft out there as part of the space race dominated everything else at the time. Even the much probable failure of the mission itself. Vladimir did not back off knowing all that, because then his best friend Yuri Gagarin would need to take his place. What was left of Vladimir Komarov was collected from the explosion caused by the impact of the spacecraft hitting the ground, and the charred remains of a hero were displayed in an open casket, which is often said that was to fulfill Vladimir Komarov's own wish, so as to embarrass the Soviet Union about the lessons that needed to be learned. This part of the story, however, remains a point of contention.
Spaceman Gagarin paid tribute to his comrade, and the urn containing the ashes was carried to its final home. Vladimir Komarov, cosmonaut, husband, father, and hero of the Soviet Union, had given his life. He will long be remembered as a great space explorer.
Lost cosmonauts. Lost cosmonauts are referred to the Soviet cosmonauts who went to space but unfortunately due to mission failures could not survive and never came back to Earth, with their demise never being acknowledged by Soviet space authorities in order to hide the failures in the space race during the Cold War. As the inverted commas signify, this is of course all so far but in the theories. The Lost Day. The Lost Day is the term given to this social media post which suggests that NASA actually discovered a missing day in history during some of their research, which clearly aligns with the date of a biblical account where God actually stopped the moon and sun from moving for the daylight to remain for longer. Of course, there is no other evidence found anywhere so far of this so-called discovery by NASA, or even this curious little clip of an online post, which is causing the chaos. So maybe bigger than the question if NASA found this lost day is where did the original poster find this article? The Black Knight. The Black Knight has been dubbed for a mysterious source of weird signals that are reported to have been received at different locations and occasions in human history by various individuals around the world. Probably starting way back around 1899 with Nikola Tesla himself at the Tesla Tower. Nobody really knows where the name Black Knight came from, but the image that can't help but come to mind and in Google results with that name now is this one. This unidentified object that was captured during STS-88 mission while the crew was assembling the International Space Station, which has really become the face of this mystery. Because it was here that after decades of speculation, theorists finally were looking at a captured object that could be linked to all these incidents. And it just made sense to link and made them think, yep, this is it. That's where it's all been coming from. Likely because from alien spy satellite to a cry for help in form of an SOS message from the beyond, such a floating thing can be linked with anything at all. Even if it is just
supposed to put a thermal blanket on the outside of the station to protect it from heat losses. I was ahead on my task, so Jim offered to give me the thermal blanket and let me attach it. When somebody said, "What's that floating away?" I looked and I saw this blanket. I looked at the tether where it was supposed to be, and it wasn't there.
Jerry, the thermal covers got away from you.
How did it do that? I don't believe this.
It was a really bad feeling.
Edgar Mitchell. The massive popularity of Apollo 11 can very well mask other Apollo space flights that were part of the Apollo program, like Apollo 14, the 8th crewed space program, third to land on the moon and the first one to land in the lunar islands.
Apollo 14 achieved all the science that it had hoped to achieve, and it pressed the boundaries of space exploration in ways that future crews would build upon. And as we prepare to go back to the moon, we definitely follow in the footsteps of these brave crews that went before us and build upon the scientific information that they returned.
With the crew that included Alan B. Shepard Jr., the commander, Stuart A. Roosa, command module pilot, and Edgar D. Mitchell, lunar module pilot. Edgar Mitchell was the 6th person to walk on the moon, but the first one to ever do a javelin throw on the moon.
It's the greatest javelin throw of the century. See if it is. Oh, Lefty himself. Outstanding.
Initially supposed to be part of the ill-fated Apollo 13, Edgar eventually was able to set foot on moon in the Apollo 14 mission, during which he logged a total of 216 hours and 42 minutes in space, setting records along with Shepard and Roosa of most time and travel distance on the lunar surface, collecting about 94 pounds of rock and soil samples.
The samples returned from Apollo 14 were incredibly important. They told us so much about the formation of the solar system, so much about the material that makes up the moon. They found themselves in valleys that were deeper than they thought. They found themselves working up hills that were higher. This was an exploration at its finest.
For the colossal distance beyond the Earth that he traveled through in his life on his road to glory, to actually leave the Earth, he chose a place much nearer.
January 31st, 1971, Apollo 14 lifts off from the Kennedy Space Center. On board, astronauts Stuart Roosa, Alan Shepard, and Edgar Mitchell.
On the eve of the 45th anniversary of his lunar landing, when he passed away at 85 in his home in Florida, and in sleep,
They hold the record for the longest ever moonwalk.
possibly dreaming of an endless journey across the universe.
Words are flying out like endless rain into a paper cup. This let the water cast a separate across the universe. Warm sorrow waves of joy are drifting through my open mind, possessing and caressing me. Gentle road to evil. Nothing's gonna change my world. Nothing's gonna change my world. Nothing's gonna change my world. Nothing's gonna change my world.
I have a very satisfied life, Larry. And it's because of the experience and because of the desire to make a contribution. My whole attitude toward life and toward being of service and toward pushing the frontiers has expanded.
Wow.
And there's great joy in doing that.